The political and media and donor elite, who is a small group, relatively, usurped the power of the Democratic electorate. And it was a pretend primary because they were making it so hard and suppressing anyone.
Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Marianne Williamson. Subscribe here wherever you get your podcasts and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. So it's quite obvious that Democrats' odds of winning the presidential election plummeted on June 27th, when Joe Biden melted into a puddle of senility on stage during a debate with Donald Trump. This week, reflecting on Trump's win, Tyler Austin Harper wrote of the cocktail of impossible problems Kamala Harris faced in The Atlantic, quote, Harris could not distance herself from Biden's unpopular record on inflation and the southern border. She could not distance herself from his unpopular foreign policy in the Middle East. She could not break from him while she simultaneously served as his deputy. And she could not tell an obvious truth, that the sitting U.S. president is not fit for office, when asked by reporters, and so she was forced into Orwellian contortions. Those are good and true points. Democrats should be haunted by one absolutely critical decision they're currently glossing over. Why was Kamala Harris in this position at all? Her popularity was lower than Dick Cheney's going into that disastrous debate. It was one of the biggest reasons elite Democrats were fearful of Biden stepping down from the ticket as his health wavered, quite obviously. Instead of opening up this question to Democratic voters who expressed immense dissatisfaction with Biden and Harris in polling, the party doubled down on snuffing out any and all competition for the nomination. Today's guest tried to give Democratic voters an opportunity to choose a new candidate. She debated Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in 2020. She tried to debate Biden again in 2024. Now, in the immediate aftermath of Harris's loss, Marianne Williamson posted a video to X making an impassioned argument. Watch this.
Make no mistake about it. Responsibility for Trump's victory lies squarely at the feet of those who took it upon themselves to cancel the Democratic presidential primary.
It seems as though left-leaning elites are suddenly realizing Marianne had a point. Marianne Williamson joins us now. Marianne, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I want to see if you could just maybe take us back to your decision to run against Joe Biden in the, I should put this in air quotes, Democratic presidential primary. Why did you do it? And how did the party machine try to thwart you all along the way?
I decided to do it because I believed, and I think that my beliefs have been proven correct, that the traditional Democratic corporate playbook, which I believe was undertending to the needs of the working people of the United States, was not going to beat Donald Trump in 2024. I have long been aware, as anybody is aware who simply looks at it, that he has ushered in a new chapter of American politics. It's theater now. And we needed, in order to defeat him this time, because remember, 2020 was a different situation, COVID and so forth. In order to defeat him, I knew we needed to create a political phenomenon as great as the one that he created. And I don't mean as great, I mean as intense, as potent. And I believe that the only way to do that is to create a politics so righteous and so virtuous and so placed in service to the people of the United States that it would create a compelling vision, so compelling that it would be an alternative chosen by the American people in 2024. What would that mean? It would mean universal health care. Given the fact, for instance, 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. Over half of our bankruptcies are medical. 70 to 90 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured. We have over 1 million people rationing their insulin. We have people in this country, millions, selling their blood plasma. I see the despair out there. I see the untended to despair out there. That was one thing I felt. And also, remember, every other advanced nation in the world has universal health care. Tuition-free college and tech school. a proactive effort to create peace and attention to children. We have children, so many children at risk. We have millions of American children who go to schools in places where they don't even have the adequate resources to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, certainly by the age of 10, then the chances of incarceration are much greater than the chances of high school graduation. I see so much despair out there, and I didn't see, and I don't see, and obviously the American people didn't see, an adequate response to that level of despair on the part of the Democratic Party. I saw it, and I tried to say it, and I feel that in every audience, every group of people that I did say it to, I felt that my message was heard. And the fact that I got almost 500,000 votes in the primary, given how de-amplified my message was, that means almost everybody who heard me actually voted for me. Now, why is that? Because my agenda was truly a working people's agenda. And you have to have a major party in the United States that is unequivocally and unabashedly dedicated to the working people of the United States. Now, how did they make sure that I wouldn't be heard? The main technique, the main weapons here are social media, the internet, and their mainstream television partners. During the 2020 campaign, given that I was a minor candidate, I felt that I was given a fair exposure on CNN, MSNBC. I was given a CNN town hall. Now, why do those things matter? Because this was a Democratic primary. Democratic electorate, if they don't see you on CNN and they don't see you on MSNBC, they honestly don't know you exist. So the one thing they do is de-amplification. The second thing they do is they just outright lie. They will create whatever narrative. So they seek to suppress your narrative, and they seek to promulgate whatever narrative suits their purposes. She's kooky, she's crazy, some mocking, but some outright lies. And that's what they do. And then they would say ridiculous narratives such as, we don't primary a sitting president, which is just ridiculous. I remember when Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. Primaried Lyndon Johnson. And I also am well aware that their doing so is what brought the fervor for an end to the Vietnam War. That's what turned that fervor into such a political factor that Lyndon Johnson actually dropped out. Things like voting, even listening to her, is contributing to his defeat. She's being a spoiler, which is ridiculous because it's a primary. There was everything from vendors who are afraid to work with you in case they turn off the Democratic Party, so-called progressive organizations whose policies were aligned with mine, but were so tied into whatever ability they had to get a phone call returned from the White House, or whatever obeisance they had to their own donors, that Emily, they wouldn't even talk to me. They wouldn't even have a Zoom call with me. In other words, so many people conspired with the Democratic Party to put a lid on it. We will not have a primary. The political and media and donor elite, who is a small group, relatively, usurped the power of the Democratic electorate. And it was a pretend primary because they were making it so hard and suppressing anyone. First, they did it with me. Then they kick you off ballots. They cancel events. They infiltrate your campaign.
Wow.
To the point where first me, then Bobby, then Dean Phillips, we all received various degrees of derision. And they got what they got. And I still believe, that had the Democratic electorate had an opportunity to truly hear all of the options, if we had had a robust conversation over the last year and a half, then I think it would have been a very different campaign. As it was, the Democratic Party allowed there just to be a void. And Donald Trump took advantage of it. And we have what we have today.
I mean, this insight is going to fall on, I think, welcome ears among many members of the Democratic voting public right now. And Marianne, I mean, just thinking about, to your point, you got votes, I mean, serious numbers of votes. Do you think that people in the Democratic Party cracked down on the primary process because they were fundamentally afraid? It's not just that they don't like the policies of the people who were challenging Joe Biden, but they were fundamentally afraid that he would lose, and therefore they would lose. They would lose some measure of control over the future.
Well, absolutely. Because if in fact an agenda such as mine, or, it's not just me, it's anybody listen, any candidate who is FEC registered and qualified according to the Constitution of the United States should have had a fair shot. Do I believe that the group we're talking about would have lost their power if they had really opened this thing up? Yeah, I do think they would have lost their power. And I think some of them in their deepest heart would have preferred Trump win than give up that power.
The other point you made that I wanted to zoom back in on was this point about theater. I think this is something you understand that other people in the party don't, that when Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, he ushered in, as you said, a new era in American politics. And I thought Kamala Harris was at her best in this campaign when she was sitting down with someone who you know well, that would be Oprah. And then there was the Madison Square Garden rally, which the response to it was it reminded me kind of the Access Hollywood tape response. And as egregious as some of these things might be, voters see Donald Trump differently than a lot of people in the Democratic elite and the media. So looking back on how high-profile Democrats, powerful Democrats ran this campaign, what could they have done, if anything, with the candidates they were working with to match that level of theater that Donald Trump has now brought into American politics?
Resign. Resign the position that they have given themselves, by the way. These are self-appointed protectors of the Democratic project. Let in new people, because the process is as important as the goal. Ultimately, the end is inherent in the means. I believe, for instance, that the counterforce to the kind of strongman politics that Donald Trump represents is deep, authentic righteousness and virtue. And if you're going to have a politics based on righteousness and virtue, as Lincoln would say, the right as we see fit. None of us are perfect, but if we are making an honest effort at what would honestly, if we are to adhere to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, that God gave us inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, what public policy decision would promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to the widest array of people? You can either have that, or you can be thinking about what will make your donors happy. So the crowd that thinks that their job is to kind of broker doing the right thing with making sure that big insurance companies are happy, and big pharmaceutical companies are happy, and big food is happy, and big chemical companies are happy, and big agriculture is happy, and gun manufacturers. I can't pin the gun manufacturer thing on the Democrats, however, but everybody else I can, including big oil, God knows, and the military-industrial complex. The corruption is so deep in both parties. So that crowd, what could they have done? They are so tied to believing that the money is everything. Sometimes I felt, Emily, during this campaign, over the last 3 months, there were moments when I felt, my God, he's running a presidential campaign. She's running a fundraising campaign. We raised this money. We raised that money. Hillary had more money than Trump. Money alone won't do it. An authentic emotional connection with the American people is what does it. And the American people didn't appreciate the paternalism of a system that seemed to be saying, we know what's best for you. Anybody with a modicum of historical understanding knows that when there is a large group of desperate people in fear, people in confusion, the emergence of a strong man is almost inevitable. And so the lack of psychological perspicacity, the lack of emotional astuteness that is involved in the pseudo-sophisticate crowd that currently runs the Democratic Party is very unfortunate. They got what they deserved. It's a crash and burn for the Democratic establishment. But we didn't get what we deserved. And the Democratic Party now needs to have the political equivalent of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where there's a deep and humble inquiry into what has happened, that the Democratic Party has lost its emotional and psychological connection to such a wide swath of the American electorate. Right now, it doesn't look like that's where they're going. Right now, it looks like the post-game analysis is being run by people who think just blame everybody else. Blame the Latinos, blame black men, blame white women, blame whomever. And for a system, for an organization, for a political party, just like for an individual, you're going to have to sit down and look in your own heart and your own conscience and into your own mirror and to say, what was my part in this? If the Democratic Party does that, there will be a regreening, there will be a rebirth, that's where the phoenix will rise from. And if it doesn't, anybody interested in a more left-wing populism will simply have to forge another path. But people have seen through it. The curtain has been pulled aside. All this codependent, whatever the DNC says, it was just a little man in there. It was never a Wizard of Oz. And we need to get back to our own critical thinking. And I think this is a wake-up call for the American people that I think ultimately will actually be good for this country.
And let's stay on that point, because our friend Crystal Ball recently wrote an op-ed in Dropsite that was titled "Bernie Would Have Won," and she said the path not taken in 2016 looms larger than ever. Bernie's coalition was filled with the exact type of voters who are now flocking to Donald Trump: working-class voters of all races, young people, and critically, the much-derided bros. This is an ascendant argument now, in the days after the election, that this bold progressive agenda would have been a superior agenda to sell to voters than Harris's kind of milquetoast centrism. Others, though, are saying Harris run as the most progressive candidate ever. Jen Rubin at the Washington Post said something to that effect. And speaking to the Free Press on election night, you said the lesson for Democrats is to become the Democratic Party again. Could you elaborate on that, Marianne, and just sort of weigh in on this debate?
My agenda was the Bernie progressive agenda. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to say that early in the New Hampshire primary, Bernie came to New Hampshire. I'm sure because the Biden administration had asked him to. I can't imagine that he just woke up one day and decided to. I don't know. He came to New Hampshire early in the primary when I was just beginning to get my sea legs under me. And he gathered all the progressives in New Hampshire. He gave a speech that was absolutely what I was standing for. And then he said, we all have to vote for Biden. So Bernie was part of that deal where we're going to get our best bet by reelecting Biden, and then maybe Build Back Better equivalent will be able to pass with a Democratic Senate. So yes, do I believe that that agenda is what would have won? Yes. However, it was my agenda. And by de-amplifying my campaign, the Democratic electorate did not have a chance to recognize it. And a lot of the smearing, a lot of the character assassination, a lot of the de-amplification and promulgation of lies, I'm sorry to say, was actually taken up by many people on the left who were played like, oh yeah, she's kooky.
Right. Marianne, another place where you have been on top of the ball in a way that other Democrats have not, and it seems as though some of them are taking entirely the wrong lesson from this election, is talking to independent media and having sort of authentic conversations like, honestly, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance did on Joe Rogan's program, sort of politics aside. He sat there for 3 hours and talked to Joe Rogan. Why do you think, or how important do you think going into those spaces is for professional politicians going forward? As you say, the curtain's been pulled back. So you kind of need to play that game.
Some of these independent media platforms have as much power as legacy media. And I believe that it's journalistic malfeasance on the part of any major media platform, whether it's independent or the mainstream media, not to give a platform to qualified candidates. I begged Joe Rogan. I begged Lex Fridman. Amy Goodman wouldn't have me on until the morning of the New Hampshire primary. And so I believe that a lot of the election engineering, that's really what it is. We're talking about people who are seeking to manipulate the process that has happened among independent media, people really not taking seriously, I believe, their responsibility to the public was happening on the independent side as well. I'll give you an example. Elon Musk. Elon Musk did a Twitter Spaces with Ron DeSantis. He did it with Bobby Kennedy. He did it with Dean Phillips. And he said publicly on X, I will do a Twitter Space with any of the presidential candidates. He tagged me. And I said something like 3 times, I'd love to. And he wouldn't have me. Jon Stewart wouldn't have me. So what they do is they create I felt on this campaign that there was a doppelganger,
Right.
of who I am. It's very difficult to compete with this doppelganger. Oh, we know you. You're the crystal lady. There was a almost irrational animus. I'm sorry to say, it was very difficult. So it was very difficult. The de-amplification of my campaign made it very difficult. So when people say Bernie's agenda would have won, I was the one standing on Bernie's agenda. Bernie was telling everybody vote for Biden.
The other thing here, I'm curious. I mean, speaking of the primary, I know you disagree with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on a lot of different issues. I am curious, though. He is a genuine sort of opponent of corporate corruption in government. And I wonder if you have any hope for what he might be able to accomplish in a Trump administration if he is put in a formal position of power.
Yes, I do. I like Bobby. I like him as a person. I consider him a friend. And a lot of the things he's talked about with food, for instance, were my policies as well. And people can go on a Marianne 2024 and see that. I'm the one in the 2020 Democratic debate, who talked about how we have a sickness care system rather than a healthcare system, and that in order to address this, we have to look at our food policies. We have to look at our chemical policies, at which point Chuck Todd or whomever it was, whichever one of them at the time, cut me off. But when it comes to a lot of his issues about food and the over influence of some aspects of the pharmaceutical industry, listen, this is how I see it. Trump has won. He is the democratically elected president-elect. And to me, it's almost a sacred duty of citizenship that we honor that. To me, that's part of the terrible damage that Trump did 4 years ago when he would not accept that the will of the people had been expressed. It was expressed now. And so I'm not entering into this next chapter with my dukes up. And I don't think any of us who really care about forging a loyal opposition, which I'm committed to as much as anyone, will do that. If Bobby can do any good, I heard, we don't know, is it just rumor? Will it actually happen? But the word is that a man who is an expert on regenerative farming has been offered a big job at USDA. Listen, if that's true, I'm very, very happy. And so I will celebrate, I will honor anything that I see happening in the Trump administration that I feel is, that's a good idea. In the meantime, I'm very concerned about his support for just drill, baby, drill. Very concerned about that. I'm very concerned about some of the forces in state legislatures, which will feel very emboldened now at limiting women's rights, particularly reproductive freedom. I'm very concerned about some of the aspects of Agenda 47 having to do with mass deportations, having to do with the militarization, even further militarization of the police, and the things he talks about bringing in the National Guard for. So I'm deeply concerned. I want to be deeply alert, but from a very loyal place. Listen, you know what I learned from this campaign, Emily? Something has been shattered in me. We're all trained in more ways than we even realize. They're the bad guys and they're the good guys. I'm over any of that. Some of the so-called, they don't believe in the wonderful things. That wasn't my experience. And too many of the people who I thought they're the good guys. We're all people. And I think that whatever answer there is now requires that we all come out of our silos.
I want to ask about Donald Trump's claim that he believes God spared him in Butler, Pennsylvania back in July for a reason, and that it's changed him spiritually. He was posting prayers to St. Michael the Archangel. He's not Catholic. That was quite interesting. As a Christian and a conservative, I've been watching that with some keen interest, and I know a lot of Christian conservatives have taken that very seriously. And he seems to me very much the same, at least publicly. I don't know him personally, but what do you make of that? Because it really seemed to resonate with a lot of people on the right. You're a spiritual leader. What have you seen?
If we are to say that God saved Donald Trump, then are we to believe that God was punishing the man behind him who took that bullet and died? To me, that's terrible. A man died there. This was not just about Donald Trump. I'm happy that Donald Trump was not hurt seriously, but I'm horrified, as every American should be, that there was a man there who died that day. Too little conversation about that for me. My sister died of breast cancer. Was she somehow other people who survived had been saved by God? No. I don't ascribe to that. And also, I'm sorry if this was an experience that was a spiritual awakening for the president. First of all, I don't disparage that idea, and to some extent, I can't imagine it not being a bit of a spiritual awakening for anyone. At the same time, Donald Trump definitely has a record, of using imagery that Christian nationalists buy. For whatever reason, nobody can figure out. Saying that the Bible is his favorite book. Remember when he said the Bible is his favorite book? And then they said, well, can you tell us which part of the Bible? What story? He said, I don't know. There's so many
All of it,
that I can't even think of one. Well, I couldn't think of one because you know what I mean. So look, I listen, you want to know what I think right now? I hope he's having a spiritual awakening for the sake of our country. I hope he's having a spiritual awakening. And, it's an interesting thing about Donald Trump. I'm old enough to remember Donald Trump from the 1980s. I'm old enough to remember those interviews with people like Barbara Walters. He was an okay guy. He was vulgar, he was garish, but he was a little left of center. And if you had said to me in the 1980s, when I saw those interviews, Donald Trump is going to be president, I would have said, why? But I wouldn't have been horrified. I've been horrified watching his turn in the direction of some things that I find absolutely horrifying, including genuine neo-fascist tendencies at times. But I'm hoping that he will feel now that he has enough of a mandate to be himself, and that his true self, the angels of his better nature, will emerge in all ways. Like I said, that's my hope and that's my prayer for this country. Whatever can create a sustainable path forward at this time will not come from hate. It will come from, like I said, a loyal opposition at times. Man, if he's going into this drill baby drill thing, I'll be first online. If I see mass deportations, if I see militarization of police, if I see National Guard, if I see civil liberties and civil rights being compromised, I will be first in line to mount a passionate debate and counterforce. But it can't come from hate. It can't. It can't. Martin Luther King said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. I don't want to have contempt for anyone. And I want to have an ability to own my yes and own my no as elegantly as I can with everyone.
I'm so glad you brought up Martin Luther King Jr., somebody who was allied with the Democratic Party of the 1960s. And you wrote on your Substack this week, we will be the product of a profound political alchemy activated at just about the moment when any of us realized last night, oh no, he's winning. Something woke up and something grew up in each of us. Marianne, can the Democratic Party have a spiritual awakening along the lines of, actually respecting people, figures of today that harken back to Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s? Can that happen in the Democratic Party?
Well, that's what remains to be seen. It's certainly what I was hoping. Like I said earlier, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but the main voices you see now on the View, on cable TV, representing the views of the Democratic Party, are just blaming everybody, blaming the voters, blaming Americans, blaming groups of people. It's outrageous. They need to move aside. And if they have a deep and humble reckoning, then yes, reemergence will occur, and revitalization and regreening and rebirth and new beginnings. if they don't, I think the party will continue to decline, not only in votes, but in relevancy. And but the American people are moving forward. I believe that there are enough of us that want a politics of righteousness, who want a politics of virtue, that want a politics of compassion for the vulnerable among us, who recognizes, as Roosevelt said, that our success is not getting more for a few, but making sure that those who really need the help get it. There are enough of us who rest our politics on the idea that just as God is asking us to be good people, what is good behavior? What does good mean? What does integrity mean? What does character mean? What does honor mean? And to actually ask those questions in terms of public policy. If the Democratic Party chooses to be the container for that level of soulful inquiry, then I'm happy. If they don't, we will create that conversation, and a new form will appear that allows us to do that. Like you said, I wrote in that article, something's happening inside people right now. A lot of people, this has been a wake-up call. You know, a lot of people are talking about their grief. Well, I've been in that grief for a year and a half. A lot of people are talking about how shocked they are. I've been saying for a year and a half this was going to happen. The good news about the bad news is how many people are waking up, realizing that they were in a codependent stupor. They just let the DNC usurp the power of the voters with this, like, they must know what they're doing. Well, they didn't. And a lot of people collectively will be making the decision what happens now. It sure would be helpful if the Democratic Party has you were asking, is Donald Trump going to have a spiritual awakening? The question is, will the Democratic Party have a spiritual awakening?
Right.
We'll see. I wish everybody well. The best thing that could happen in America is if both the Republican and the Democratic Party return to their most soulful, high-minded principles. That's the best thing that could happen.
Marianne Williamson, it is always a privilege to spend time talking to you. Thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time.
Oh, you too. Always great to talk to you. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I think Marianne's perspective right now is so interesting, given what she went through trying to do what so many people, even some people in elite circles, are saying someone should have done back then. We should have had a primary process. Maybe we should have had another primary process after the June 27th debate and after Biden decided to step down. These are all the thoughts that people on the left are talking about now, talking about more openly now. But Marianne was having that conversation all along. So it was a perspective I thought was well worth exploring. Appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much for sticking with us all week. You were so helpful in tuning into our live stream on election night, and so kind to leave all of your thoughts, your comments here on YouTube, on the Undercurrents channel, where everyone should subscribe, over on Apple Podcasts and wherever you download your podcasts. And then if you want the full premium experience of the show, head on over to undercurrents.tv. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more soon.